Welcome to Yachting International Radio, Sandra. I'm so pleased to have you. I must say, you are my go-to person when it comes to legislation. You are all over it. So it's really a privilege to have you here and to be able to unpack pregnancy, falling pregnant on board. So I know you've got a lived experience, whether we go into that or not, I'm not too sure. But I had a crew member reach out. She fell pregnant in a country that wasn't her own, in the States. And as we know, medical bills over there can run high very quickly. If you do find out that you are pregnant, what do you do? What's the first point of call? Because she reached out, she said she contacted Yacht Crew Help and Nautilus, and still she felt a little bit lost. What would you advise?
Thanks, Karine, for having me here. First, I'm going to just make a disclaimer that this is not legal advice or financial advice in any way. I think the first thing when you are pregnant is to decide, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep the pregnancy? It is something that I've had to face. With regards to, disclosing and whether you should inform the boat. So I will get to a particular point of the crew member, that the situation that you're currently dealing with. But I think the biggest thing that we have to understand is that pregnancy on board is not treated as there are implications or there's a lack of rights actually that arise because of this. I think the first thing that we need to understand is that any rights that you might have will stem from your Seafarer Employment Agreement. So the biggest thing to understand is that what does your SEA say with regards to your maternity benefits and paternity benefits if you are obviously a man? In a situation where you are already pregnant on board and you've turned to Nautilus, you've turned to Yacht Crew Help, all they can do is help you enforce the rights that you have. If you didn't have any rights to begin with, they can't help you. Nautilus, if you weren't a member beforehand, also you can't retroactively go and take out the policy like any insurance policy. So I think the first thing to understand is that what we believe are our rights on board, and I'll go into those rights in a minute. So what are your rights as an expecting mother? Those are going to stem from a few things. So it's from your flag state, from your SCA, as I mentioned. Company policies, regardless of flag state or your SCA, might have specific things in place. Your medical insurance, your P&I insurance, possibly if there is sickness and illness that arise or complications from the pregnancy. And then also, if you are an EU seafarer and you have some kind of rights that are affiliated with a social security system, like you have a national social security system. So I think, there's a very big gap between private yachts and MLC compliant yachts. And there's nothing to say that silent on these rights. There's nothing to prevent an employer from including these. Okay. So,
quick question. When you mentioned the SEA, is it standard to have that included in the SEA, or all SEAs different?
No, all SEAs will be different. So every flag state will have a model Seafarer Employment Agreement that is like the very minimum that must be offered. Now, with regards to pregnancy or maternity benefit, your flag state only 9 social security protections. So most flags of convenience like Cayman Islands and Marshall Islands, they offer just the very, very basic minimum, okay? When you come to EU flags and national flags, they often offer all of those 9. And again, even if let's say that Cayman Islands did offer a maternity benefit, it would only apply to seafarers of the Cayman Islands. So, even if it did, it's still limited. So I think that falling to the flag and looking to the flag for protection is not the answer. I think it is going to come down to individual SEAs and what employers are willing to offer.
Which makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so then what are your rights as a expecting mother?
Yeah, so obviously, as a human being, you have the right to health, safety, medical protection. And we have to separate out the difference between medical care and leave pay. So maternity leave pay. So your salary when you are on maternity leave, right? So obviously, if the SCA is silent on any of these things, you have no rights. There are no rights. In fact, if you are working on a flag like Cayman Islands, you usually have no protection. They can also dismiss you and just give you your 30 days notice. They don't need to have a cause to dismiss you. And I think that leaves all seafarers really vulnerable, but especially pregnant seafarers. So I think it's really important that you understand what the benefits are, what your rights are before you join. I know women often don't want to discuss this. They don't want to say, okay, are there maternity benefits? Because they might go, oh, planning on falling pregnant? Like, let's just not hire her.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so women don't want to even have worry that it's going to affect their employment. So that's the maternity stuff. So what you will have, especially if you're an MLC compliant yacht, is if there are complications that arise from the pregnancy. So, if obviously you would need to be fit to continue to work on board, you might need to go for another ENG1. I've actually had to do that before to show that I'm fit to work. And you can work on board until 24 weeks. And then there's other things that kick in, which we can talk about later. But if there's a complication arising from the pregnancy itself, you can argue that this would then be covered under an illness.
Yeah.
And that your P&I insurance could kick in and cover you under, sick pay for illness. But I think that there's also another part of it that if you're injured, like let's say you trip and fall and there's actually an injury that happens, then you should be covered for things like that as well. Okay, so you should then have up to 16 weeks to be signed off. But I think those are very different situations and scenarios. I think the big thing that happens, especially with the example that you used, is that if a complication is not due to an injury on board, we're going into grey water here. And it would come down to whether the medical insurance, so for example, the crew medical insurance, you can actually take out the maternity cover. Their specific maternity cover will kick in and cover things like antenatal classes and all your scans and checkups and all of that. And
you think those scans should be paid leave?
Okay, yeah, you should be able to attend those scans and go ashore and attend them. Absolutely.
I don't think it's discussed enough. And so this is where it becomes a very grey area and captains are not too sure what they can or can't advise to the crew member.
Well, it's really just part of shore leave. It would be like if you are sick and you need to see a doctor ashore.
So what should the boat or the owner do once the crew member has disclosed that they are pregnant?
That's a really good question. So the choice to disclose or not, as I said, would come down to whether you are fit to work, whether there are safety concerns, and or whether you want to kick in some benefits, right? But the first thing that should take place is a risk assessment needs to be done. And the UK has a really good, the MCA has a guidance note, MSN 1890. So this risk assessment, there's a non-exhaustive list of risks that you need to assess for the pregnant person. So just some of the basic things. Obviously, if they're working with hazardous chemicals, if the work is really fatiguing or there's night work, you can adjust these things. And you can work on board up until 24 weeks. After that, you would need to make sure that the boat is not doing trips of more than, again, assess if you are medically fit to work on board, or if there's any changes, any pregnancy-related complications or conditions that could affect the safety, an emergency response. Obviously, you wouldn't have master duties. So you would be removed from having any kind of master duties. And I know before I returned to work, when I was pregnant, I actually went to the ENG doctor in Cape Town, and he had never done a pregnancy fit to work. So you had to contact the MCA.
Crazy. Okay, so going back to your SEA, we kind of covered that question about whether it covers pregnancy, haven't we?
What I have seen is that boats are more and more willing to include that, not because of the flag, because it's ethical. I have seen some of my pursers reached out to me and shared that it's not part of their SEA, but it's part of the company policies and guidelines.
Yeah. Okay. So why do you think it is? I know the answer to this, but the listeners don't. Why is it so challenging for expecting mothers to navigate all this information out there and understand what their rights are?
I think pregnancy is often unplanned, whether you are in a relationship or not, whether you are married or not. So there's often a lot of emotions going on. You might be in your first trimester, have a bit of brain fog, and you're trying to now navigate, well, hang on, should I disclose? There's often a stigma attached to that, to disclosing that you're pregnant, what financially the implications are. Can you continue to work? Do I have to leave? It's stressful. There's also a lot of different legal jargon. There's a lot of legal jargon and medical jargon that you have to now wrap your head around, which is complicated. So I think you're at a very vulnerable point in your life, and it's just an added kind of stress. So it can really put a dampener on something that's meant to be a really joyful and wondrous time. I know it often causes a lot of stress and triggers a lot of unease and what now? What do we do now?
And I have had a number of cases where crew members have decided to have an abortion and they leave it the last minute to tell the captain because they are fearful that they will lose their job. So I think as an industry, we can do so much better in providing that psychological safety and support to ensure that the welfare of the crew member and the unborn child is protected.
I think that we forget that every single one of us came from a mom, you know. I think it's about having some kind of empathy. And I know many crew who have decided to terminate. And that's only a decision that person can make. You have to weigh up the pros and the cons. And often they might find that the cons are too great and maybe put off having children until much later. But I really do think that if we saw better policies in the yachting industry, both for maternity and paternity leave, we might see that crew might make different choices.
Who would be the best person to initiate rolling out these policies?
Oh, that's also a very good question. I think that senior crew definitely need to be putting pressure on the captain, on the management. I think this should be questions that all crew should be having, not just women, because again, it takes a man and a woman to create a baby. So why are men not being involved in these conversations? Why are they not asking questions, especially for their partners? I think, and for themselves as well, for paternity leave. I think that we really do. Yachting, it's almost like you have a shelf life. And they pass their sell-by date. They must just go. We're not going to provide any more benefits because we're actually trying to push them out, which I think is really preposterous. These are the people who have the most knowledge and skills and can really lead us and who provide stability for the industry. I know a lot of moms have returned to work. So maybe there is that stigma that, well, once a woman has left, that they're not going to return to work. So why provide any benefits anyway? I think if we look at it from that perspective, instead of the fact that we have a largely female workforce in yachting compared to the rest of the seafaring industry. And why is it that we aren't treating it like a normal workforce who is going to reproduce at some point?
We should. And we've got the resources to.
We do. We have the resources. I mean, it's yachting. Yachting is not an industry that's driven by for profit. Like the rest, the commercial industries. And even if you look at charter yachts, they often operate at a loss, reasons of the owner. So it's a luxury hospitality industry that doesn't really need to exist. I think offering that little bit of extra social security benefit, regardless of the flag state, is going to be a very small drop in the ocean compared to what the overall operational running costs are.
Yeah, for sure. So, what are the principles around sick leave in yachting? I don't know about you, but I was never sick on board. As soon as I got home, I was violently ill. Because I believe that you can't take sick days, like it doesn't exist. So what the knowledge around this?
Yes, so obviously, I think we have to distinguish between being sick, like, okay, I've got a cough, and being unfit to work. Like you, I never took a sick day. I was never sick. And then as soon as I got home, my body just shut down. If you are unfit to work, so depending on your boat, depending on if it's MLC compliant or not, and you have, a sick entitlement, you should be able to take off 16 weeks of paid leave. Now, I've had to do that as purser. We've had crew members who have been signed off. They would be, unfit to work. They're repatriated as soon as reasonably possible. And then essentially what happens is your P&I insurance will kick in and pay for that crew member's salary so that you can replace them. So it's not really necessarily a big cost to the boat. And I know depending on your P&I insurance, they can also pay for some of the costs associated with that specific injury, if it's an injury.
What can apply if someone is pregnant?
So pregnancy is not seen as an illness or an injury.
So commonly, shore-based companies will give you 3 months paid leave. Do you think it's something that we should push as an industry? Because 30 days.
Absolutely. I mean,
like, what is 30 days?
Yes.
How are you going to live off that? Yeah.
So I think we have to distinguish between sick leave and a maternity or paternity benefit. Okay. Because the two is completely separate. Pregnancy is not an illness or a sickness, and as such would not fall under sick leave anyway. A maternity benefit where you are paid whatever it is for 16 weeks. I know one of my pursers was saying they had 32 weeks. It's been reduced to 16 weeks. Usually they require you to take 10 weeks before your due date and then 6 weeks after your due date. So I'll give you 16 weeks. Okay. But even if you go ashore, every single company might also have a different policy. I know, for example, in South Africa, it is supposed to kick in and pay for your salary, so replace your salary when you are on maternity leave. So that's like a social security benefit that you are involved in with your own country. I think that's the same for UK seafarers and EU seafarers. They also have social security protection that they pay into already that will provide them with those benefits. Now, whether the yacht will pay for something like that or not will come down to individual policies. As I've mentioned, the flag states are only for paying your salary. It's only for seafarers of that flag. Okay, so for Cayman Islands, even if they had a maternity benefit, it would be only for Cayman Islands seafarers. So whether an individual yacht decides to have that or include it in a policy is completely then up to them if it's not required under MLC. So they haven't chosen that out of those 9 pillars for Social Security, if they haven't chosen that maternity pillar.
Do you know of a management company or a vessel that does a good job of protecting women who do fall pregnant in the industry?
I would have to get back to you on that one per se. It doesn't really come down to the management company. So, every management company would take instructions from the yacht owner. And a management company might push specific things or say, these are the things that we believe in. I know, for example, Wilson Halligan put in some good measures with regards to crew being able to access mental health help and assistance. But I can't actually tell you one that I know of that particularly does include, for all of the yachts, a maternity or paternity benefit.
Okay. I have a question here, which is, why do women under extreme medical and emotional pressure frequently feel resignation as their only option?
So I think you do not have any rights under your SEA or under the MLC, or no social security protection, and you won't cover any pregnancy related expenses, then often, you feel like, and I've had to do this before. I resigned because when you're already in a vulnerable position where you're just hoping that, maybe you can get a good reference out of them, or there's nowhere really to turn. So what's the point in fighting? Just remember, it's very stressful. Pregnancy is one of the biggest life stresses that we have, coupled with losing your accommodation in your home on board, having to generally move across country, move home, set up a life there. I mean, it's all really stressful. Add a legal battle, I almost feel like, what's the point? And maybe it's your owners know this. Maybe management knows.
From an insurance perspective, are you able to define what owner liability is and what that would include?
Owner liability would be more for if there was an accident or an injury on board. So your liability insurance would kick in if crew have been injured or there's an accident on board. It would kick in to cover your wages and cover your medical expenses going forward. Yeah. So because pregnancy is not an accident,
I see,
or an illness or an injury, fallen while you're pregnant, or if somebody assaults you while you're pregnant and you have a pregnancy related complication, those would be things that might trigger a liability under the ship owner's liability.
Okay. So under MLC, what should apply in cases of medical incapacity during pregnancy?
Well, if it's, do you mean that something has happened, like you have had a pregnancy related act? Is that the question?
Yes, it is.
Like maybe you have gone into labor prematurely.
Yeah, or if you have a infection, because of an emergency, something's gone wrong, or let's say you did fall down the stairs and as a result it broke your waters. I don't know, hypothetically speaking.
Yeah, well, then it should be seen as an injury or an accident, and then the liability insurance should kick in like anything else. I think the biggest thing is that it comes down to causation and how an insurance company or a management company might view that. And again, like if you're sick in hospital and you're having to try and fight this from your hospital bed, it's really difficult. I can tell my own story just with my insurance, but I have always covered my own medical insurance when on board for this very reason, because I didn't I ever wanted to get pregnant, but I didn't want to ever have a situation where if I was injured or if I was ill or even had a dread disease like cancer or something like that, I didn't want to be placed in a position where I'm having to now figure out what can I get financially, right, in terms of payments for my treatment and things like that. I didn't want to find out only after the fact, because these things can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially if you're in the US. So yeah, I would always recommend for people to just have their own medical insurance, regardless of the vessel.
So as a green crew member, you took out your own insurance?
It wasn't necessarily when I was green. I think I was much further along the line where, I noticed that there was a gap. You'd be between employment, then you're not insured. Even when you go join a new boat, each boat would have very different, and skiing, which are also sometimes excluded in your insurance. I had to take out additional diving insurance. But the big thing is that, I did have my own medical insurance, specifically when I was an HOD. I just took that out and I paid for it myself. No questions.
Just thinking back when I was green, it wouldn't be something I would even consider.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important that we are having this conversation so we can educate the audience of their options. Last question. Let's go solution focused.
Yeah. And just which included, it was, I think, underwritten by Jerry Blue. And there's also the different options between having US coverage and non-US coverage. So
Mm.
US coverage is always going to be a higher insurance premium. And while we're talking about premiums, we can ask, why don't yachts just insure everything? Well, it's going to come down to premiums. The more things you cover, the higher the premium, the more expensive the insurance is, right? For me, because I was spending a lot of time in the US, I mean, if you are sick in the US and you have to go to hospital in the US, you're going to bankrupt yourself. I wasn't prepared to take that risk.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So last question. Let's go solution focused. What changes would you like to see within the industry from an ethical perspective and protecting pregnant women specifically?
This is a very good question. I think we need to really understand that pregnancy is a normal and healthy part of life. It's not something that needs to be swept aside and somebody made to feel like they're a problem. So I think the first comes down to, how do we treat pregnant women? What does this look like? It means that we can build policies, regardless of whether the, can ask boats to have medical insurance that has a maternity benefit. Now, for most of those policies, there are exclusions. So you usually have to have been employed for 10 months or 12 months or whatever it is, which is why I always recommend just having your own insurance. But even so, even if there are exclusions, it's having policies. What does a maternity leave look like? When should you take maternity leave? From what date can you take maternity leave? And then what date could you return to the vessel if you decide to return to the vessel? And I know there are moms who have returned to the vessel. I have a friend who's a captain. She has had both of her kids on board with her on the boat. So it is absolutely possible. I know it's very different if you're the captain. I think it's about having ethical discussions and honest discussions. I think there needs to be zero coercion. Women need to feel, what are you going to do now? What's your decision? I think we need to really remove that kind of pressure on women to make a decision and whether to leave or to stay. I think it also means protecting your dignity, because at the end of the day, inherently affects how you feel about yourself as well. I think there needs to be confidentiality around decisions made. Not everybody needs to know exactly what is happening with that person. There are still medical implications if the person does decide to stay on board. And I think if the boat is not traveling more than 2 hours away from shore, there's no reason why somebody who is pregnant can't continue to work right up until they aren't able to. Obviously that would look different for every person depending on what their job is and also depending on where the boat is. So I think genuine leadership is going to be proactive. It's not going to address these problems after the fact. There should be adequate policies in place. There should be insurance in place. We should have risk assessments that are ready to go and not something that's an afterthought. It's not just about compliance. It's about protecting people who are really in their most vulnerable state and making them feel supported.
I love that, Sandra. The thing that comes up for me, the culture within our industry, is when there is a problem, we have to get rid of it ASAP. So
Yes.
I think this is why we have these particular challenges. It's almost like there's a sense of panic that I feel from captains who have this on their plate. And we go to the MLC and we could go run with the 30-day notice pay, a period, and then we close that chapter and move on. Yeah, it's very unfortunate because there are options. If it's a head of department that falls pregnant, I believe there's enough work that they could do to work part-time shore-based, whether it's facilitating the provisioning or creating itinerary. There's things that you can do.
Yeah, Nautilus actually has a really great maternity and paternity guideline. So the vessel is going to be doing these trips that are more than 2 hours, and you can accommodate a seafarer in another position, then we absolutely can do that. As you said, chief stewardess definitely can be doing shoreside work. As you said, provisioning, crew lists, travel letters, you know, there are sort of purser related duties. Obviously for pursers, that, yeah, it's a much easier thing, but as a purser, you are sitting down for most of the time anyway. Yeah, so, you know, I think there's definitely things that can be done to accommodate and support. And I know a lot of women who have done exactly that. They've worked up on board until they really physically couldn't anymore. And then they've gone ashore and they've just helped out until it's their time to give birth. I think that's great. You know, I don't think anybody should be having to hustle and work when it is such a stressful, I mean, you're bringing another human into the world. It's like, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sandra. Really appreciate it.
No, you're welcome, Karine, anytime. And yeah, I hope crew can really just appreciate that the only person who's going to be able to completely protect them is you. Yeah. You are only able to completely protect yourself. Take out your own medical insurance. Okay. There's a lovely broker, Maria Carlson, who helped me with mine. She's in Fort Lauderdale. Join Nautilus, because if you haven't joined them before things go wrong, they can't help you. So join Nautilus and always have access to a phone that can call landlines. And it might seem like such a simple thing, but if you want to get hold of your flag state, often you need to call on a landline. And Skype's been discontinued, but there is another company that's doing, I think, like 360 voice talk or whatever it is. Just be able to call, because they can give you a confidential, without prejudice, information on what your specific rights are on your specific boat, so that you can make better decisions.
Well said. Thank you so much. And I know that you're so helpful. So if crew do want to reach out to you, what would be the best way to do that?
Oh my goodness. I am generally on WhatsApp, so I avoid email like the plague. So my WhatsApp is +2772 199 4636. I don't mind if crew do want to pop me a quick little, WhatsApp. And I have assisted many seafarers who are pregnant. I helped a French seafarer who was fired while she was pregnant and put her in touch with the maritime lawyer, and she was able to recover a whole year's worth of wages.
Wow.
So whilst I can't necessarily help attorney or of your shipping master, so that you can understand where to get help.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much.
If your brand belongs in the heart of the yachting world, this is where it happens. Yachting International Radio reaches over 1 million yachting professionals and enthusiasts every month, with 77 million impressions, 220,000 social followers, and 74,000 podcast subscribers. Our hosts are insiders, crew, captains, CEOs, trusted voices shaping the industry. This is targeted, high-impact advertising in a luxury niche. Visit yachtinginternationalradio.com/advertise. Your audience is already listening.